You're here because you know something. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there.
Don't worry, don't be afraid, ever. This is just a ride.
I'm picking up vibrations. I'm picking up vibrations. I'm picking up vibrations.
Welcome back then to Good Vibrations, bringing you the last volume of 2015. Just wanted to get one in before the end of the year. And this one is all about the strange rituals that we all undergo at this time of year that we call Christmas, where it all comes from, and why we do all the strange things we do, like putting on stupid hats and wearing woolly jumpers with reindeer on and having relatives round that we don't really like, that we only see at this time of year, and stuffing our faces with food that we can't really afford and feeling ill from it afterwards and paying off our credit card bills for about a month after the event. Well, some people do anyway. So I really want to get into where all this comes from today. And my guest is a guy that is ideally placed to take us through some of these ancient origins. I'm chatting today to Johan Oldenkamp.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for inviting me to your show.
No problem, man. Good to have you on. I guested on your show a few weeks ago on Pateo TV, of course, on Conscious Consumer Network. That was a blast.
Yeah, that was a great show where you introduced a lot of, I think, important insights on what's really happening in the music industry. So I think that was a brilliant show.
Yep, that was good to do, and it's good to kind of turn the tables on you today and have you in the interview seat, you know. Okay. And we met, of course, a few weeks ago at the Open Mind Conference in Copenhagen, which was a great event, and your presentation was the first one of the weekend, and it was absolutely awesome, mate. It blew the audience away, and it was mind-blowing information, and all the other speakers had, you know, a high standard to measure up to, so I just want to commend you for what you put forward in that.
Thank you very much for these kind words. But I think the overall level was very high. There was only one speaker where I was not too comfortable with, but all the other speakers, including you, were really high standard. So I think it indeed was a marvelous conference.
Well, it really was. And you're the proprietor of the Holy Science website, and we should point out that that is holy with a W, holyscience.org. And it's described on your website as Holy Science is the reunion of pure science and living spirituality. And as we said, you're also the host of that Pateo TV show. Just to start off, so that people can be familiar with your overall work, do you want to let us know what you perceive Holy Science to be and what it was that got you into studying that whole area? Yeah,
thanks for this opening question. I am a scientist. I have a PhD, so I know university academic world from inside out. But I know now that what universities are doing is not real science. It's not unbiased search for the truth. Actually, it's completely paid by their financiers, and they have to find results that match what the people who pay want. So this is not true science. And on the other hand, what spirituality or so-called spirituality is telling us is not right either. When I talk about the religions or including New Age, that is not really helping us to understand the true nature of spirituality. And when we go back to ancient times, the ancient Greek, but also in ancient Egypt, which was actually called Kemet, the Black Land, and of course Sumer, in those ancient times, there was no distinction between spirituality and science. It was all the same. When we look at alchemy, for instance, that's science and spirituality in one container, so to say. So what I did with Holy Science, I made it a whole again. I made spirituality and science two sides of the same coin, which they are, which they of course should be. And it's very strange that that was cut into half, and now both the universities and the religions offer us half truth, or I can probably say half lies, because it's not helping us to understand the true picture. So holy to me means the whole of everything, and it's not H-O-L-Y, because whole means a hole which something is lacking. So holy to me means full of holes, and I don't want to bring holes to people. I want to fill those holes with knowledge, with insight. So that's why I call it Holy Science, science of the whole of everything.
Sure, and there can't be many academics such as yourself that have gone down that route that are open-minded enough to embrace these other possibilities. You know, I think most people with a background similar to your own would be very stuck in the establishment, and they've got a job and a salary and a title to protect, and, you know, they just would not be prepared to go down the information route that you have.
No, some are kicked out of the university setting and the academic world because of their findings. They find results that are blocking, or at least not in line with the paradigm. And actually, the university paradigm is a belief system. So when they find something that is contradicting the generally accepted belief, then they are, of course, expelled from the academic world. So that happens, and yeah, I resigned myself, so to say. I quit my job and I sold my house and I took all the money from the bank because I want to be completely independent. And I think true science is always completely independent. When there is another interest at stake, you cannot be a real scientist anymore.
Absolutely. Yep. No ulterior motives.
No. The truth will be the only reason why you do it, to find the truth. And if you find something that is contradicting your theories, then you have to find better theories. That's all.
Yeah, I certainly respect that. So we were chatting online a few weeks ago, and I kicked around the idea of doing a podcast with you discussing the origins of this time of year that we refer to as Christmas. You said, yeah, I'm the man for the job. You know, I'm up for shedding some light on where all these traditions come from. So that's really what I want to get into today. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that modern day Christmas is a bit of a melting pot, a bit of a hodgepodge of various ancient traditions from the pagan world and from other cultures, and it seems to be all hinged around the winter solstice, 21st of December. Right. So maybe we should go through the various components that have been combined into this sort of melting pot one by one, and we should probably start with the winter solstice itself, I guess. Could you explain why this event was considered to be so important to many of our ancestors, and some of the symbolism around it that's been deployed in Christmas?
Yeah, I will certainly do that, but to help the listeners understand why it is the solstice, the winter solstice, let me explain that this celebration comes from ancient Northern Europe, and that used to be the Germanic culture. We now refer to Germany as one of the countries, but actually the Germanic culture, I'm not sure if that's a good correct English word for this.
Yeah, we say Germanic, yeah.
Germanic, yeah. So it's also the Netherlands and most part of Denmark and Belgium and also Poland. That whole region, that was one people, and the Roman Empire was unable to defeat them. We know the story of Asterix and Obelix, but that was not in France. That was in the north. So the Romans were not able to defeat them. They were too strong for them. But
that was known as Gaul, right?
Yeah. And that's the French interpretation, but it was actually the Frisians who were not defeated by the Romans. And then later on, the Romans found a trick. Instead of using military power, they used religious power, and they were still able to conquer the whole of the Germanic people by religion. And what they did is they introduced a saint, Saint Nicholas, as a representation of the sun, and that's the bridge that I'm going to explain later on, so that the listeners already know it's absolutely about the sun and about the midwinter feasting. And yeah, why is it important? When we look at the yearly cycle from the northern hemisphere, then we see that on June 21, the arc of the sun is at the highest point, and it's also the largest one. So it takes the longest time to be above the horizon, and also the rising at midday is the highest of the whole year. And then it starts to descend until all the way down on December 21, and then we have the smallest arc and also the lowest height position at noon. So but then it stops. So if you would continue that declining, then you would at a certain moment see that there would not be any sunrise anymore. Well, that's only true when you are above the Arctic line. But where we are at UK and the Netherlands and Europe, then it will not happen. So, but instead of going up again on December 21, the arc stays 3 days the same. So you can say the arc is dead, or you can say the path of the sun, the celestial path of the sun, is dead for 3 days. 3 complete days after the winter solstice. So you have the winter solstice mostly on December 21, and then it's dead on 22, 23, and 24. So it's the same arc, the same position of sunrise, and the same position of sunset, and the same length, and everything is the same. And only after 3 days of being dead, meaning the same, then there is a sunrise which is a little bit to the side, and that means that the arc is a little bit higher. So you can say there is a birth, the rebirth of the light is on December 25. And that means that the light is, from that day on, is becoming more powerful. The arc is growing and growing and growing until, of course, June 21, and then the same cycle starts again with the descending. Sure. So it's an annual cycle where the arc is increasing and decreasing. That's all. And the moment when it starts to increase again, that is the December 25th date. That was always celebrated in the Germanic culture as the midwinter feast, and especially the night before. That was the most important night. It was called the Mother's Night, and that was the night it was celebrated because there was the longest night. Most people talk about the longest night, but there is not one longest night. Actually, there are 3 longest nights in a row, but the last one, starting at the sunset on December 24, that was the moment where the major feast started, and it was so important for them that it was actually the height of the year. So it's actually the celebration of the rebirth of light. And when we go to Christianity, what Christianity did was creating a sun god, just like in ancient Egypt or Kemet, Ra was a sun god, but also Horus was a sun god, and in ancient India it was Surya, and many ancient cultures had a personification of the sun. In ancient Greece it was Helios, and Apollo it was in the Roman time. So
also Krishna and Buddha would be included?
Buddha is a little bit different story, and Krishna too. So Hinduism and Buddhism is a little bit different, but when you look at Christianity, that's the most clear. It's actually a sun god. But yeah, most people think of an historic Jesus, and that's absolutely wrong. There is no historic evidence for that at all. But it's also blocking your spiritual development if you think of an historical Jesus. Jesus is just a personification of the light of the sun, and every human being can become like a Jesus, can become Christ, can create what we call Christ consciousness. So we can become a light source in this rather dark world. That's what it's all about.
I certainly want to get into the process of achieving that Christ consciousness type status as we go on. But there's some wordplay at work here, isn't there? So you've got the Son of God, which is thought of as Jesus, as in S-O-N, the Son. Mm-hmm. But of course it's identical phonetically to S-U-N, the Sun, the unconquerable Sun, which is celebrated on the Winter Solstice. So the Son of God is effectively not Jesus or any other historical messianic figure. It's the sun we see in the sky.
Exactly. Yeah, in English it's the same pronunciation. You cannot hear the difference. My mother tongue is Dutch, so there is a little bit difference between those two words. But it's absolutely right. It's the Son of God, but it's also the S-O-N in the sense that it's a creation, because Father means the Creator and the Son means the creation. And of course, the Son is a natural creation. So the S-U-N of God is also the S-O-N of God. But you are also the Son of God, and I am too.
Sure. So, yeah, the symbology of the sun, S-U-N, disappearing below the horizon and effectively being dead for 3 days and then rising again on the 25th, dead and then rising after 3 days, reminds me of something I've heard before. I think I've heard that story somewhere.
Yeah, you might have heard that. That's a quite popular story. But what most people don't know is that it's not an original story. That story is actually completely based on the sun god named Mithras. Or Mithra, and that is a Persian sun god, or it came from what we now call Persia, or Iran, Iraq, from the Babylon region. And in the Roman Empire, that religion of Mithra was brought back home, so to say, was brought to Rome by the soldiers and the merchants. And it became very popular, and the priesthood in Rome, which is actually a Saturnian worshipping priesthood, they were completely unhappy with this worshipping of the sun, worshipping of the light. So they somehow encouraged the Emperor Nero to start to put a lot of pressure on the Mithra believers. And we all know the story that they were fed to the lions, but it was very important to point out that it were not the Christians that were fed to the lions, but the Mithra believers, because the idea of Christianity was not invented at that time. That came, according to my research, about the year 200 CE. But some say about 100, but not mostly not before 100. And we're talking now about the year 30 CE. So it is impossible to put Christians in that story, because they were not there. They would come many years later. So what was done was the worshipping of the light was suppressed in order to promote the worshipping of the darkness. That's the whole idea, and people were afraid to be caught with scriptures that were talking about Mithras or the light. So they changed the story, not the essence, but they changed the people who were in the story, so to say. And as an example, let's say it is now forbidden to have, let's say Mein Kampf of Adolf Hitler. Then I just changed the author of the book into let's say Harry Potter, and then I say no, this book has nothing to do with Hitler or anything. It's a book about Harry Potter and things like that, and then I might get away with it. And that was the trick they did. They, if you also see the Nag Hammadi scrolls, it's all about different characters. They don't talk about Mithras any longer. They talk now about Jesus, and Jesus or Jesus in the Greek writing is exactly the same. It's also the sun god, but most people think it's a human being like you and I, which is very not too clever to do that, because then you block your own spiritual development. If you think there is a savior outside yourself, you will never be saved. You can wait as long as you want, but there will never come a savior outside of you. The real savior is already in you.
Sure. And it's the same trick that the Roman Church employed themselves when they sought to establish Christianity as the kind of default religion, isn't it? They applied it to the pre-existing pagan festivals that have been around for, I think, thousands of years, to make the transition as seamless as possible, so that the people would continue to celebrate the same customs at the same time of year. But as you say, just the characters and the names were changed. Because I think worship of the winter solstice goes back many, many thousands of years, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely correct. It's the principle. If you can't beat them, join them. So they saw they could not beat the Mithras believers. So what they did they changed it into Christianity, and then it was certainly in about 300 BC or CE. Sorry, it was allowed, and from that moment on, it gradually became more and more popular. And at a certain moment, it became the religion of the empire. And of course, they had to gradually pull people into that. So of course, they used the practices and the feasts and the celebrations that were already there. And little by little, they changed it. It's like the boiled frog syndrome. Yeah, in the beginning, it's just a little bit changed, a little bit warmer water. But in the end, it's not really helpful, good anymore. And to give an example, Christmas actually means literally to abandon Christ. It's a sacrifice. So the literal meaning of the word Christmas means the sacrifice of Christ, or you can say the sacrifice of Christ consciousness. So I strongly urge people not to use that word anymore. Just talk about the winter feast, or the feast of the rebirth of the light, but don't use the word mass at the end.
Yeah, I never knew that. I mean, we don't think about where these words come from, you know. We're so familiar with them, and yet we have no clue what the origins are.
No, but my mother tongue is not English, so I see sometimes differences between English and Dutch, and I don't know other languages as well. So I try to see where do words come from, and then by doing research on that, I find that sometimes are deliberate. Word tricks used on us, and I can give you, for instance, the word mortgage it's a French word, and it has everything to do with death.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah, exactly. So, but that was a different subject. But these words are not accidents. They use words in order to use a kind of spell technique or
word magic.
Word magic or black magic.
Yeah.
And by using those words again, we give consent to. I'm not sure if that's the right way to say it, but we somehow do not object to it. That means that
Sure.
we give consent to it.
And one of the church services that Christians flock to at midnight on Christmas Eve is called Midnight Mass. So from what you've just said, that would mean midnight sacrifice.
Yeah, the whole idea of mass is to sacrifice, but they use rituals for that. They use the wine and the bread, but people don't know that it's their own blood and their own body that they are sacrificing. And that's what you do when and literally it's a ceremony to sell your soul to the devil. I don't want to scare people too much with this, but just do your own research. Don't believe a single word what I'm saying right here, but do your own research, and then you will find out that there is something very spooky about all the ceremonies in the Roman Catholic. I don't even like to call it a church. It's a kind of a cinema where they use tricks on you.
Yeah. So we've established that the winter solstice is obviously all about the sun. Mm-hmm. But the season of Christmas, as we call it today, there are heavy elements of Saturn involved as well, as you just mentioned. And you had the Roman festival of Saturnalia, which was also based around the winter solstice, and it incorporates elements of Saturn worship. So it seems to be a bringing together of Sun and Saturn symbology into one event.
Yeah, it's true. The feast of Saturnalia was before that. It was actually starting on December the 17th, but they somehow were able to merge those two feasts together into what we now call Christmas. But that feast of Saturnalia was actually what we now call Carnival. It had to do a lot with eating, overeating, and also sexuality. There were many orgies held then, and everybody was completely going crazy, so to say. So it had nothing to do with spirituality or reaching a higher level of conscious. It was just behaving like
the opposite of that.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say animals, like beasts, because even animals don't do crazy stuff like that. So it has nothing to do with becoming pure. It is about becoming as black as you can be in a spiritual sense. I don't talk about colors, of course.
Is that why everyone eats so much at Christmas and there's Christmas parties and everyone just, goes crazy?
I think that's part of it. But of course, you have the coming together. People want to be together, and I think that's a pure good thing about the whole feast, because that's the moment in ancient Germanic times. That was the most dark period, and dark means that there's more danger outside than when it's light. So people tend to be inside, and it's also cold outside. So inside it's warm, and especially during the most longest night, you create a kind of celebration that the annual cycle is over, and that a new one starts again. So the overeating may be from Rome, but the coming together, I think that's an authentic Germanic part.
Yeah. So in many ways, it could be said that the year actually starts on Christmas Day as the sun starts to ascend again up to its apex on the 21st of June, and then repeats the cycle for the remaining 6 months. It could be argued that the year actually starts on the 25th of December and not the 1st of January in that sense. Yeah,
we can talk about the 1st of January. That's a special subject. But actually in ancient Germanic times, the year was divided into two parts, a summer part and a winter part. Not like the 4 seasons we now have, but actually 2 parts. And in the mid of the summer, which is actually the division between what we now call spring and summer, there was the midsummer feast, and between autumn and winter, there was the midwinter feast, because winter and autumn together, that was the whole winter semi-seasons or semi-year season, so to say. So where does it start? Does it start in the middle of the winter? I think the most natural way of starting a year would be at the start of the summer part. So that will be the the spring equinox.
Sure.
But that's to me. I think when the spring starts, that's to me is the natural start of the year. But you can also say where the light is reborn. But what true is that it was a huge feast in ancient Germanic. It was the most important feast of the year.
Yeah.
And that's still true in our culture.
And the spring equinox is connected to Easter as well, I believe, going back to this myth of the Son of God dying for 3 days and then being resurrected. Obviously, that is celebrated at Easter, and that's connected to the spring equinox in March.
Yeah, so they somehow messed up the events a little bit, the annual events. But yeah, that's true. They put that later on because it's difficult to explain that the death and the rebirth is in the same feast. Yeah. So they pulled that together so to confuse people a little bit. And Easter has everything to do with the light becoming longer than the darkness. When we see the rebirth on December 25th, then the light starts to become a little bit longer every day. But during the spring equinox, there is still longer darkness in a 24 hours natural day than light. But after the spring equinox, then there is more light than darkness in a natural day of 24 hours. And that feast is always celebrated on the first full moon, I have to say it correctly, the first new moon. But maybe I have to look this up, but somehow it has to do with the moon cycle as well.
Yeah.
And
that's why the dates are always different every year.
Exactly, it has to do with the moon cycle too. And then it became that the first Sunday after, I think it's the new moon, but it can also be the full moon. I'm sorry that I don't know this out of my head. But that is the moment where we now celebrate Passover or Easter. But that word comes actually from passing by. So the light is passing by the darkness. And the claim is that it is a Hebrew word. Now, I looked it up. That's completely nonsense. I think it's an ancient Germanic word, and in the Dutch language, that word is still there. So, and that makes a lot of sense. So it's an ancient word for passing by. That means the light is taking over the darkness. In a natural day of 24 hours, there is more light than darkness until the autumnal equinox, and then that process is reversed.
Sure. And I might be going off a bit of a tangent here, but sometimes we do this, and I'm just throwing this in as a bit of an aside. But the idea of the sun as it's viewed from the northern hemisphere dictating when the equinoxes and the solstices take place obviously depends upon the Earth being a globe. And you probably know where I'm going with this. There is a very strong school of opinion now that actually we don't live on a globe at all, but the Earth is in some way flat, the flat Earth theory. A lot of people are coming round to that way of thinking now, it seems. I really don't know what to make of it myself. I'm completely on the fence about it. But if we do live on a flat Earth, it seems to me that it would throw out all these ancient myths that are based around the sun as it's viewed from the northern hemisphere and the idea of hemispheres at all. And it would also throw out zodiacal ages and precession of the equinoxes and all of that stuff. I mean, where do you stand on all this, and what do you think of that theory and where it's come from?
Yeah, that theory has been annoying me for long now, because many people ask this question to me, and in the beginning I was answering them one-on-one, but at a certain moment I was so fed up with it that I did a complete TV show about it. That will say a part of my episode number 13 of Pateo Television. I explain this in full depth, and I give complete and utter proof why it is a globe and why the whole idea of a flat Earth is complete nonsense. But I can see where that theory is coming from, because NASA, of course, means never a straight answer. NASA is really lying to us, and NASA is not able to give an authentic, complete picture of our home planet. All the pictures NASA provides, they are composites. So I can understand, and there are many more reasons why people think that what NASA is bringing us is false, and that is completely true. But deducting from that we live on a flat whatever pancake is completely wrong. So it's difficult, but it has to do with the Coriolis effect and many other things, and also the secret of light. It is true that we do not actually see the sun. the sun I call sun Helios, what we see is a creation of a light bulb inside our atmosphere, and that makes the whole part a bit tricky. And that has to do with what light really is, and universities are completely not aware of the true essence of light. They have so many assumptions that are absolutely wrong. But it's difficult to explain that on the radio. I explain that also. So what I would like to do for this, Mark, is just refer to holyscience.org, and then you have on the right-hand side the episodes of Pateo Television, and on top of the right-hand side you find episode number 13, and just click on that, and you will see all the answers there. And yeah, what I now know about the flat Earth theory, it's actually a CIA experiment to see how stupid people have become. And I don't want to offend anybody with this, because in the beginning I was also tempted to think it was true, but then I started to do my own research, and I saw that it was absolutely impossible. Apart from all the historic evidence that you just mentioned, because why would our ancestors adopt a strange theory? Because we were supposed to believe that in the ancient times people thought the Earth was flat, and then suddenly we discovered that it was a sphere.
Yeah.
But that story is even upside down, because in ancient times people knew it was a sphere until in around the Middle Ages or something later, people suddenly thought that it would be possible to drop off with your boat from the side of this reality we live in. So
it's a reversal of what we believed was the case in terms of those belief systems.
Exactly. In ancient Greek knew it was a sphere, and he could even calculate the diameter of the sphere, and he was off by just a very small margin based on just the length of the shadows on different spots, and he knew the distance between those spots. So it's very simple geometric arithmetics that he used, and we can every high school student can do this, and then you can calculate the length of the diameter of this sphere. So it's what should I say more about this? People should think for themselves, and don't that all the videos I've seen about the flat Earth theory, they make it really interesting with nice music, and they build it up, and all the. We know there are many lies in mainstream media, and I don't have to explain that to your listeners, I think, Mark, because we all know that. But don't overdo it, so to say. Not everything is false. Just start to think for yourself, and stay mentally healthy in the sense that you learn how to reason and deduct and base your findings on something that is really true, and not assumptions, and not on wild guesses.
Yeah, I mean, some of the arguments that are put forward by the Flat Earth camp are quite plausible to me, and do sound convincing, and they do kind of carry quite a bit of credence. I've looked into some of them, but to me it seems like there can be some crossover between these two theories, and it doesn't necessarily mean that things are clear-cut one way or the other. So, for instance, the Flat Earth crew claim that the International Space Station doesn't exist, or is not in space as we're told it is, and all the footage we get is just actors on Earth pretending to be in space. And to me, because as you said, NASA is never a straight answer, it could well be the case that they fake all that footage. I can certainly go for that. They also say that the moon landing footage was a hoax and was faked, and I can certainly go for that as well. And there's no reason why that can't be the case within the globe model theory. And then we're also told the Flat Earth crew will say, well, there's no way the sun is 93 million miles away. They'll tell you it's closer to 3,000 miles away. And it does seem quite implausible to me that the sun could be 93 million miles away. So maybe that's a statistic that we've been given, which is a lie, but it doesn't necessarily throw out the whole idea of a globe Earth. You see what I mean?
Yeah, of course. And that's absolutely true. The image that is created, it's actually an illusion that we see, because the radiation from the sun is coming to our atmosphere, and like a prism or like a magnifying glass, all the radiation is bent to a certain point, a focus point, and that's what we see. That is the sun we see. We don't see the actual sun. We see the focus point of radiation that's coming together in our atmosphere. So that's why it's only 3,000 or something kilometers away from us, instead of the at 93 million miles or kilometers. I'm not even sure about it. So we don't see it. And of course, the moon landing is completely fake. But also, what a couple of years ago the Chinese were trying to pull off, they made an underwater simulation of a moon landing, and they tried to sell it to the world that it was a moon landing. But then suddenly there was a kind of air coming out of the astronaut helmets, and it was so funny to see because that was a bubble that went up. You have to look careful, but if you saw it, it was so funny. So the moon landings are completely staged. There has never been a manned moon landing with the Apollo technology. Maybe they have secret UFOs created with the technology from Germany, the Frill and the Hannebau. That's possible. But not with the Apollos. That's completely bollocks, and everybody can see that. It's another episode of Pateo TV where I prove that. The one who shot the first Apollo landing was a famous director, and that's also the man who made Shining. And actually, in The Shining,
Stanley Kubrick.
In The Shining, Stanley confessed that he did it. And I also explained it in one of the episodes. So it's true that the moon landings were completely fake, and I think the Russians had a big laughter when they saw it. But it was good for them because then they could also stop with the silly technology contest that was going on. It was wasting a lot of money, and they both knew it was impossible to do because of the Van Allen belt. You cannot get through the Van Allen belt without proper protection, and proper protection means 6 meters of lead in all directions. So that is a huge spacecraft you need in order to bring biological life through that radiation belt and back. So that's a clear case. You need either a dynamic magnetic field to go through it, or a static big wall of lead.
And there was a hoax video that's been doing the rounds online recently, which purports to be footage of Stanley Kubrick shortly before he died in 1999 confessing to having faked the moon landings. And it is a hoax. I can tell straight away it's not Stanley Kubrick, it's an actor pretending to be him. And I think the reason this has been put out there is to discredit genuine researchers that would state that, you know, Kubrick did fake the moon landing footage, and he placed little visual symbolic clues to what he'd done in The Shining and other parts of his work. This is a theory that's been put forward by Jay Widener, who's the most well-known researcher that's advanced this theory. But I think the reason this video has emerged and the reason why it's so obviously a fake is just to make people that would claim this actually took place look stupid, and to therefore discredit anything else that they might say.
Exactly. It's the same as you also presented in Copenhagen with what they did with the James Bond film, where Sean Connery is walking on a moon stage on a fake moon landing setting, and then they said we actually did that so that we have a backup. Well,
plausible deniability, I think it's called.
Exactly, that's the trick they use on us. And but if you just have an open mind and you do your research, then you'll find the truth. Kubrick was a very intelligent man. And the clues he gave are really very intelligent. And when you can follow the breadcrumbs he left for us, there's only one conclusion you can reach, and that's why he was murdered. But he was so clever that the last film he shot was Eyes Wide Shut with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. Very, very strange movie.
Quite revealing.
Yeah, but the date he put in the contract, what the date was of release of that film, and that was exactly 30 years after the launch of the Apollo 11 mission. So it was a clear reference to Apollo 11, and and I think he was going too far in revealing the truth of the people that want to control and the rituals they do, that they thought he would become a liability and they had to get rid of him.
I mean, you've got to ask yourself, why would certain parties bother to put out a hoax video that is obviously faked and, you know, is obviously not Kubrick? Why would they put the energy into putting something out like that, if not to discredit genuine researchers, if these researchers weren't onto the truth? You know, what would be the point?
Yeah, exactly. Just that simple question. It's just like follow the money. But why would somebody do this? What would be the benefit or whatever, the reward?
Exactly. Okay, so let's take it back to Christmas then, because we just wandered off a bit there, but it's all good stuff.
Okay.
Can you tell me what the origin is of the season known as Yule? Because Yuletide is sort of synonymous with Christmas, and I know that's another sort of European festival or tradition.
Yeah, it's an ancient Germanic word. Maybe it's good for the listeners to look up. Let me see if I get the name right. There was a monk living close to the border of, I think, Scotland, but actually somewhere half up the British Isle, and he wrote very important books. But he was in one of his books. He also describes the ancient Germanic calendar system, and that calendar system had two different months that had the Jule inside. Actually, it's named the first Jule and the second Jule, but then of course in an ancient language. So yeah, the remarkable thing here is that the guy was named Bede. Let me see if I can look it up somewhere. But the good thing is, while he was doing work for the Roman Catholic Empire, so to say, he actually recorded the authentic calendar of the Germanic people, and that calendar was used in the whole region of Germanic, also in the UK, what is now called UK, but the part that was conquered by the Romans, and it's about half of the British Isle, the island. Let's say you draw a horizontal line halfway, that's about the line. So under that line, south of that line, that was conquered, but the north, including Scotland, of course, was never conquered by the Romans. So they still use the authentic calendar system. And that calendar system is a really beautiful solar and lunar system, in which every lunar cycle is a month. Now we have a month of 30 or 31 or sometimes 28 days, but that's not in line with the lunar, because sometimes full moon is, let's say, on the 20th, sometimes on the 17th. It can be any day actually. But in the ancient times, it was always halfway the month. So it was always the 15th or the 16th, there was full moon. So nobody, if you ask me now, are we in the period before full moon or after full moon, I have to look it up in my agenda. But in the old days, everybody knew if you were in the growing part or in the descending part of the moon. So it was really important. And they had two Jule months, and let me see if I can get the names correct. Yeah, I have it here. And the first one is now what we call something like November, December, and the second one is December, January. But the myth in between was always December 21, mid-winter festival. But if you analyze the names, I can maybe send you a link afterwards. I wrote an article about it. But if you have the names of the lunar months and you understand the meaning, then you can see that it was all based on nature. Yeah, for instance, they named a certain month after that there is a lot of wheat growing. So that means you had to cut away the wheat from what you want to grow. So it was all based on natural cycles, and that's something Rome doesn't want. Rome wants to somehow cut us away from natural cycles and give us an anti-natural, or at least unnatural cycles instead. That means that we lose connection with nature, and to me nature means God. So what Rome is actually doing is not helping us to come to God. No, Rome is actually doing a lot of work to cut us loose from God, from nature, and give us their own doctrines and their own fake gods.
Would the introduction of the Gregorian calendar be something to do with that as well?
Yeah, of course, because the Gregorian calendar replaced the Germanic calendar, and I think it would be much better for us if we still had the ancient Germanic calendar, because then we would much more be conscious of the influence the moon, I call the moon Luna, has on our consciousness. And most people, there are stories that there are werewolves and that there are more babies born on full moon and so on, or maybe more boy babies, and there are all kinds of stories. But the general opinion is that they're all stories, that there is no truth in them. But if we would be more sensitive of the influence of the lunar energy, and that's the strongest when it is full moon, then we would start to see was able to connect the dots, so to say. So that's I think a deliberate action to cut us loose from the ancient lunar solar calendar and give us the completely artificial Roman calendar. The good thing about the Gregorian calendar, which is actually the Julian calendar with a little bit just a minor change, is that it is in line with astrology, what I call planetary astrology, so the zodiac signs. But even there, it's not in line. So if you look up your own ascendant or your sun sign, it means that it's not. You cannot say it easily. If somebody is born in October, for instance, you don't know if it's Scorpio or if it's before that.
Libra.
Libra, yeah. So, but in the ancient, if the Gregorian calendar would have used astrology, that would have been something good too. But now we have neither. We don't have a good astrology calendar nor a true solar lunar calendar.
Yeah, interesting. Let's get into the character of Father Christmas, aka Santa Claus, and where he comes from and what he represents. I mean, is it down to pure coincidence that Santa is an anagram of Satan?
Well, yeah, it goes back to Saint Nicholas. That's the version that is used in the USA and also in the UK is actually based on a Coca-Cola version of Santa Claus. I mean Saint Nicholas. Saint Nicholas was celebrated in Europe, and the migrants to the USA, they took along that story and they changed it a little bit, but the essence is the same. Santa Claus is Saint Nicholas. It's a man with a big belly and with a round face and with long white hair and dressed in a red robe. Yeah. So that's the essence, and the long white hair around the round face means the sunlight. The round face is representing the sun, and the long hair, facial hair, beard, and the mustache, and the on top of the head, that represents the long white sun beams of sunlight, and that's what you see with all the characters that represent the sun. Also, Pergamentus, what was it? Dumbledore in the Harry Potter film is the sun, and also in the Lord of the Rings, Gandalf is also the same solar impersonation. It's like a sun god. So that's the way we represent the sun. An old man, because the sun is much older than our planet, at least what we assume, with long white hair. And the red color is, of course, the sun setting color. When the sun sets, it becomes red, or sometimes in the sunrise too. And in the Saint Nicholas version, also the color gold is there, with the golden staff it has, and sometimes golden motifs on the dressing. So, and gold is also the light we sometimes see when the sun is shining through the clouds. So those are the basic colors. And in the original version from Europe, so to say, or the mainland Europe, there were assistants of the sun, and those assistants are, of course, the planets. The planets are not giving light themselves, but they bounce back the light to our surface. Like the moon Luna is not giving light of her own. What she's doing is she's reflecting sunlight back to the surface of this planet, and that's why she shines so beautifully. But it's not her own light. It's maybe a little bit of her own energy, but it's mostly the sunlight she's bouncing back. And also Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury do the very same. They can be seen as tiny lights in the night sky, or tiny. Actually, Venus is extremely bright. She's even twinkling. We know the children's song, Twinkle, Twinkle, Up Above, where I'm not sure. You know probably.
Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star.
Little Star. How I wonder what your answer. But what she is all about, Venus. It's not about a star. It's about Venus. Venus is the morning star, or sometimes the evening star. And we talked about Eastern, but Eastern is also a reference to Venus. So it's an April is another name for Venus. So that's the month of Venus, and that's when the spring equinox is. So it's her celebration, and the Germanic people celebrated Venus in that period of the year. So in the original version from mainland Europe, there are helpers, and they are called black Piet, or Black Jack in the USA language.
This is in the Dutch tradition, isn't it?
It's still there's a lot debate in the Dutch for 3 years in a row now, because they say it's racism. You have the guy who's in charge is white, and the helpers
they black up, don't they, like the old minstrel shows?
Yeah, they make. It was a huge debate in USA because one of the, I think it was a CNN newsreader, she said Jesus was white, and then the whole African American people became really upset about this because they thought it was racism and said, why was Jesus white? Why cannot he be a black man? Yeah. But Jesus is of course as white as he can be because it's the sun. Yeah. The sun is white. White means shining out light, and black means not shining light, just reflecting. So the planets are black. That's why the peats are black, and it has nothing to do with African people. That's completely nonsense. So I tried to explain this in the mainstream media in the Netherlands for 3 years in a row, and I sent out press notices and whatever I can do, press releases. I mean, and just the regional radio is interested, but the mainstream, the national television and radio, they are so afraid that this comes out, because then they know that when people start to understand this, they will go back to the origin of this festival, and then they will somehow discover that the Vatican has been lying to us big time.
That's a surprise, isn't it? So are the Black Peats also the elves? Is it the same characters being symbolized by the elves here?
No, in the USA version, if I can call it like the Santa Claus version, the Black Peats are replaced by the reindeer. Ah,
right.
And there are 8 reindeer, and there are of course also 8 planets. So depending on which one you count, of course, but it's the reindeer are pulling the sun around. That's how the ancients depicted it, because they wonder how is it possible that the sun is going with such a huge speed from sunrise to sunset. There must be an enormous force before that. So all the depictions of let's say Apollo or Helios. Or Mithras, Mithras not, but Mithras too. They all had horses in front of the sun god on a kind of couch or whatever. Carriage, is that a good word? But anyway, the horse is pulling the sun around, and
so that's Santa in his sleigh.
Yes, Santa in the sleigh is pulled because there must be a huge force. So the instead of the planets as Black Peats, now the planets are reindeer. And the Christmas tree is the very same, because the Christmas tree is actually the tree of the descending tree, or the genealogy tree, because the star at the top, that is the sun. The sun is the central star in our solar system, so that is the origin, the primeval father, we can say. And then the balls in how do you call it, the small tiny globes,
the baubles.
Baubles, yeah. The bubbles, they represent the planets, and the shiny ribbons we put around, they are the orbits of the planets. So it's actually the tree of the descendants of the sun. And the lights are, of course, in the tree too, because the planets can be seen sometimes as shiny lights in the night sky. So it's all about that. And the biggest present that we get from in our life is, of course, sunlight. The sun is giving us the biggest present possible, and when we are becoming a little bit like the sun too, we start to give presents to each other as well. That's the function. When we become enlightened, or we are light in the darkness, then instead of trying to take everything, we start to give, and that's the opposite. And the sun is giving us unconditionally, day after day, beautiful energy, which grows everything here, which warms us, which even helps us to develop a higher consciousness.
Well, there's also a sense in which the figure of Father Christmas or Santa Claus can be seen to be a depiction of Saturn as well, because Saturn was depicted as Kronos in the Greek tradition, which was an old man with a white beard. So you see a parallel there straight away with the image of Father Christmas. And, as I said, Santa is an anagram of Satan. Father Christmas wears a red coat, and red is one of the principal colours of Saturn. Do you think it's the case that the original symbology behind the figure of Father Christmas was meant to symbolise the sun, but that it's been subverted by whether it was the Roman Church or other parties, so that they've turned the sun significance into Saturn.
What I've noticed in my research for many years now, Mark, and think you have done the very same, I discovered there's no such thing as coincidence. So if there is a connection, then it's always intentional. And of course we can say this is intentional because it goes back to ancient Sumer, and that is where the Saturnian priesthood seized control. But then Mithras came along, so to say. People became enlightened by the light, and they had to run away. And they found a new home in ancient Egypt, in Kemet. And that's the whole story of Abraham. The real Abraham only went as far as Canaan, and that's where he settled, just in the north of between the Tigris and the Euphrates and the Tigris. So the real story stops there, but there are some books in Genesis added to that, which is complete fiction. So what they just tell us in those books in a very hidden way is that the Saturnian priesthood went to Egypt and they seized control there. And there was one pharaoh that stood up against them, and that was Amenhotep IV. But he discovered that Amen or Amun or Amen is actually the name of Saturn, the Dark Lord, the Lord of the Darkness, the Lord of the Rings. So he didn't want to be having a name that is referring to Amun or Amen or the Dark Lord. So he changed his name into Akhenaten, and Aten means light, the light bringer. So instead of worshipping the darkness, he started to worship the light, just like all the people who worship Mithras did. And so he became a huge threat to the Saturnian priesthood, and that's why they killed him. After 7 years, they killed him. And they also killed his son, Tutankhamun. That's what we know the guy now. He was 18 years when he was murdered,
sure.
But his grave was not robbed, so that's why he became really famous, because there was a lot of valuable stuff there. But his real name was not Tutankhamun, because that's Tutankhamun, that means the living image of Amen, or the Dark Lord. When he was born, his father was already enlightened, and he named him Tutankhaten. Aten at the end, not Amun. And that's the whole story. They murdered his son, his whole family, and then later they put a military on the throne. And from that day on, they were very careful not to have someone in power who is worshipping the light. And that's still going on. All the leaders in this world are not worshipping the light. If they would have been replaced long time ago.
Isn't it interesting that Christians end their prayers with Amen or Amun, which, if that's a reference to Saturn, they're basically worshipping Saturn without even realizing it.
It's the same as the Mass, what we said in the beginning. It's the same thing. And what you say about the red color and Satan and Santa, it's the same thing. So every time you
subversion.
If you think you are connecting to the Lord of the Light, the light bringer, the Savior, you actually make it everything upside down by ending it with Amen or Amun, because then you say, that's the last word you say, so that's the one you really obey, that's the one you really worship, and that's the very opposite than what you really want to obey. At least that's my opinion. Yeah. But there's so much more about it. If people go search on Saturnian death cult or Saturn worshipping, then you see that actually everything is all about Saturn.
Yes,
and Judaism is worshipping their god on Saturn Day, because Saturday is Saturn Day, the day of Saturn. Yeah. And that's why they do that, and that's why also all their celebrations are in the night. It always starts after sunset, and that's very important because they don't want to have anything to do with the light. The light is their nightmare, so to say, their worst enemy. They want to worship the darkness.
Yeah, and Saturn is all about the darkness. And I think there have been so many depictions of supposedly the sun in ancient civilizations and cultures through the ages, where people assume that what's being revered in various monuments or writings or whatever is the sun that we see in the sky. But in actual fact, it's a reversal, it's an inversion of that. It's the dark sun, the dark lord, and it's actually Saturn that's being revered in these cases.
Yeah. If you, for instance, look up the meaning of Amun, or Ra in ancient Kemet, then you see that those are connected. You find Amun Ra, and they say that was the highest god in ancient Egypt. Well, that's a big lie. It was always Ra as the highest god. But then later the Saturnian priesthood changed Ra as the sun god into Amun-Ra, meaning instead of worshipping the sun, the light bringer, replacing it by Saturn. And many more examples are done this. So it looks to the ignorant eyes the very same. And if you have no knowledge, you can be easily fooled. But the moment you start to see the difference between the white sun and the black sun, or the real sun and the dark sun, then it becomes really clear. And it's a big deception. What any religion is doing, including Hinduism and Buddhism, but that's a little bit more subtle, is actually pointing into the wrong direction.
All connected to Saturn. And we hear that the number 666, which appears as the number of the beast in the book of Revelation and is a number generally associated with evil and the Antichrist, is heavily connected to Saturn as well. And I guess there's some significance to Saturn being the sixth planet from the sun, and also Saturday is the sixth day of the week. So it's all tying into that 666 reference as well. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely right. And the day of the ancient celebration of Santa Claus in the Netherlands is December 6th. Actually, it's the night before December 6th, but it's all about December 6th. And if you look up the so-called official story on Wikipedia, they say that the guy actually lived, which is nonsense. Saint Nicholas never lived. It's a Roman invention. But the day he died was December 6th, and that's why we celebrate the evening before December 6th. His celebration by giving each other presents. But December is 12, and 12 means 6 plus 6. So December 6 is actually 6, and then 6 plus 6 is 666.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do want to get into this whole process of individuals achieving Christ consciousness in themselves. We made a reference to that earlier, that internal process that we can all undergo. So let's get onto that in a moment. But just before we head away from some of the symbolism connected to Christmas, there's one other element of Father Christmas that's been suggested to me, or that I remember reading in a blog article some time ago. I don't know if you've come across this one, but I've heard it said that the red and white coat of Father Christmas is symbolic of a particular type of mushroom that Druids used to ingest as a kind of hallucinogenic to attain altered states of consciousness. There's a specific type of mushroom which is sort of red with white spots, and it seems to be another origin of the Father Christmas myth. Have you come across that one at all?
Yeah, of course. And the guy who wrote a book about that, not the real guy, but somebody else. Yeah. So I don't have all the names in my head, to be honest. But I had him in my radio show, and we talked about it. So there is a mushroom aspect to all this, and there is also a Roman Caesar family aspect to the story as well. So the story has multiple layers. But I think that there is knowledge of how hallucinating chemicals in natural food, how to say it, in mushrooms, is able to create, to somehow stimulate our pineal gland.
DMT, maybe.
Yeah, so something like that. I've not studied it myself, but I know that's possible. And what you then actually do is you open up your, what people call the third eye. That means you are able to see not in the physical reality with your normal eyes, but you see in the metaphysical reality, the reality of the subtle life energies with your third eye, which is the pineal gland is actually a kind of eye, and that's why all those substances are now on the list of forbidden chemicals, because they open up our possibility to see beyond the veil. And all the chemicals that are very destructive to our health, they are on the A list, and they are prescribed by the so-called house doctors. But we'll not go into that as well. Yeah.
It's a world of inversion. Everything is back to front and upside down.
Mostly when you put it upside down, you come really close to the truth. That's what I sometimes do when I see the news. I see, okay, then I have to reverse it. What does it mean?
What's the opposite of what they're saying? And the truth is in there somewhere.
Exactly. That is the most of us. We still have to check things, But most of the time, it's just like it's written down in the book by George Orwell. It's a kind of newspeak, and it means that every meaning is turned upside down and is brought as the new truth.
Yeah, for sure. So, as I think we've seen, the festival of Christmas is a hodgepodge of different sort of influences and cultures and symbolism. But as we're now talking about higher states of consciousness, there's one other aspect of the sort of Father Christmas going up and down the chimney symbology that I want to get into, which is this internal process of illumination or attaining Christ consciousness. And from what I've heard before, it involves the secretion of a kind of holy oil within the human body, which travels up the spinal cord to the cerebrum and the pineal gland in the human brain. And when this process occurs, it results in, enlightenment, so to speak, and achieving those higher states of consciousness. And I've heard that this secreted oil in the Greek was known as Christos. So once again, we're back to the figure of Christ. And this would appear to be, one of the origins of the Jesus Christ figure once again. Is that something that tallies with your research?
Partly it does, but I make a huge distinction between the physical world and the metaphysical world. And the problem with many interpretations is that those worlds are mixed up, and that's not too wise. Everything that is written down, like alchemy and all those other ancient stories, they have to use words from the physical world, because we don't have any words that are referring to something from the non-physical, the metaphysical world, because most of us do not know how that world looks like. And if we would know that, it would be very difficult to find words that are describing it good enough to give it to somebody else who have not seen it, who have not experienced that metaphysical reality. So all those descriptions are in physical words, but we should not take it literally. That's the secret of this. What it's all about, it's ascending to a higher level of consciousness. It means going up to a ladder, but that ladder is not, of course, physical, and the chimney is just another way of expressing it. It's reaching higher levels of understanding this reality, and that means making our consciousness broader and broader, meaning including more and more aspects. In normal consciousness, I don't like the word normal too much, but what most ordinary consciousness is looking to the world on a subjective level. So the ego, the lower self, is centered in that perception of reality. Everything is related to the way the lower self, the ego, is perceiving, is experiencing reality. But instead of on top of our lower self, there is also a higher self, and that's, you can also call it the real ego, or the ego with a capital E, and the other one has a lowercase e. And because both words mean, of course, I, but there is a small I and a bigger I, a larger I, and most people have no idea that there is a larger I in them as well, and that is our, you can call it our higher consciousness, our higher understanding. The true possibility for every human being on this planet is to reach a higher level of consciousness, and that's what it's all about. Once you have connected to your spirit, your true self, then you have reached what you can call Christ consciousness or enlightenment. It's all the same.
Sure. That's what it's all about. That's why we're here. People are always saying, what is the meaning of life? What's it all about? What are we doing here? That seems to be the answer. Yeah,
but that answer seems easy, but doing that requires many years of practice. For and sure. What we see now in New Age and many corrupted spirituality approaches, they are giving people fake ideas of what enlightenment means, or what true self-consciousness means. So people are tempted to do that, and they feel their ego are really happy with what they do. They feel important in the organization. For instance, if you join Scientology, like Tom Cruise has, I named his name before, then or Freemasonry, or name any other, people feel important because they hire. they grow, they develop, they get new insights and so on. But what they only do is they make their ego more and more powerful, and that is the biggest blockage to actually reconnecting with your spirit. As long as your ego is in control, there's nothing you can do. Ego is not something bad. Most people think, especially in the New Age, that ego is bad and you have to kill your own ego. Well, that's utterly nonsense. Your ego is just, it's like your automatic pilot of your system, and it's doing great job. But for very delicate work, you should not use the automatic pilot. You should do it manually, so to say. And that's the whole thing. But if you don't know what the difference is between automatic pilot and manual, yeah, then you are lost. So it's a very important distinction, but hardly anybody knows anything about this. So they think they are developing their own spirituality, while actually their ego is playing a big trick on them. They are fooled by their teachings and by other people around them.
Yeah. And just going back to this imagery of Santa Claus going down and up the chimney, and the way that ties into this Christos, this holy oil going up down the spinal cord to the cerebrum. There's some interesting wordplay there as well, because there's a part of the human brain in the neocortex which is known as the claustrum. And doesn't that tie interestingly into Santa Claus? So you got to wonder whether there are individuals, human beings, that kind of invented this myth as a way of communicating this information in a veiled kind of way, or if it's the universe kind of synchro mysticism just tying all these things together, because it's just some amazing parallels in the imagery there.
Yeah, of course. And as we said before, there is no such thing as coincidence. But the point I'd like to make, Mark, is that spirituality comes first, and then the metaphysical world comes first, and then the physical one. So if you focus on bringing that oil up in your body, then you're trying to put the horse behind your carriage. It's the other way around. So spirituality should start first, and then the oil will come naturally. It's like your mindset. If you have a mindset that you are, now let's say some people want to lose weight. They think they are overweight. If your mindset is that you are light as a feather, then that mindset alone will reduce your weight. But the other way is much more difficult. So changing your mindset with your diet is much more difficult than changing your diet with your mindset. That's what I'm trying to say. So spiritual development should come first. And people should not worry too much about how that kind of oil is created and how it really works, because I think most of it is actually a metaphor. I don't think that's a literal truth. But to be honest, I've not did research about that, so I don't know. Maybe it's also in the physical world, but it's most certainly a good metaphor for the metaphysical world.
Sure. And what would you say to people that have listened to this, or maybe they had some knowledge of this information before, and they don't really feel like celebrating Christmas anymore? Maybe they used to enjoy a good feed with the family and watching crap TV, and they don't really feel like doing that anymore. I mean, would you say it's still okay to enter into the spirit of the season and go to Christmas parties and do all that stuff, you know, as long as you have a knowledge of what's behind it? Because we've said that there's Saturn worship that's been sort of covertly smuggled into the whole Christmas celebration. Would you say that as long as people have some understanding of what's going on, they can still kind of enjoy themselves in the season without connecting energetically to any of the dark aspects of it?
Absolutely, absolutely. But wordplay is really important here. So use the right words. Call it a midwinter feast, or call it Mother's Night, the night before December 25th. So the night after sunset on 24th December. Use the words that have that energy, that meaning. Because if you still use the ancient words, it's still like doing a prayer and saying Amun at the end. Then you destroy all the energy, and everything is lost, so to say. So I would most certainly encourage to keep celebrating the midwinter feast, because that's very important. It's the rebirth of the light, and it reminds us, that's why the feast is so important, it reminds us of our own possibility of rebirthing. We can become Christ. We can become the light. We can connect with the higher self, the higher consciousness. And the sun is showing us how to do that, because the sun is going down, and when he's all the way down, he goes up again. And sometimes in my life, I'm very down too. I'm very, very low in my energy and very, very narrow-minded and all those things I don't want. But yeah, it happens to me. And if I then just go outside and I see the sun, then I'm reminded of how beautiful the light is and how I can become light myself. So it's very important to celebrate this every year. And of course, the other celebrations too, the spring equinox and so on. But I think the winter solstice, and especially the moment when the sunrise is reborn again, that's an extremely important moment in the year. So please celebrate December 25th and the night before, but do not call it the sacrifice of Christ.
That's crazy. Christmas, sacrifice of Christ consciousness. Who knew that?
Yeah.
All right, Johan, it's been a fascinating conversation, man. I knew it would be. Thank you for all that amazing information. Do you just want to remind people where they can go to find more of your work online?
My website is, I have a multilingual website. It's pateo.nl, Pateo.nl. Pateo is a Latin word, means no longer hidden. And NL to me means natural logic, or you can even call it natural law. It has nothing to do with the Netherlands, but it's just the extension I have. And there's a lot of information in English and other languages as well. Spanish, German, French, and so on. And I have also an all-English website that's holyscience.org. And holy spelled, of course, W and double L. That's if you are having an English tongue, that's the most easiest website to go to, because there's also a good search engine. What I just wanted to pick up was not there, but on my other website, so I couldn't find it as quickly as I wanted to.
Sure.
So those are my two websites, holyscience.org and pateo.nl.
This is just for fun.
Vibrations. I'm picking up good vibrations. I'm picking up good vibrations. I'm picking up good vibrations.